everybody, and you're very welcome to the latest episode of the South Tip Arts Podcast. Well, here at the Arts Centre in Clonmel, we're absolutely thrilled to have our doors open to the public once again, and we're delighted to present our current exhibition in the main gallery, After the Fall, an exhibition of contemporary Irish woodturning curated by Stephen O'Connell and kindly supported by DCCI and Tipperary County Council. The exhibition represents a survey of the very best practitioners of this craft form with a strong emphasis on sculptural work. The selected artists reflect a diverse range of methods and material approaches, as well as enviable skill and invention, showcasing what is possible within contemporary woodturning. After the Fall seeks to take a measure of where artistic woodturning currently stands in Ireland now and presents the work of a group of makers between whom there are many cyclical points of influence. We hope that the work will surprise and inspire both those familiar and new to woodturning and broaden their expectations of this very traditional craft form. In this episode, we'll hear from some of the artists involved in the exhibition. Obviously, under the current circumstances, it was not possible for us to have a public opening, which is unfortunate from the point of view of all the artists involved. It would have been really lovely to have them all in the building and to celebrate their fantastic work. But obviously, we are where we are. So I'd like to say a huge thanks to the artists for helping me out enormously in responding to some questions that I sent them. And it's lovely to hear the artists' own voices describing their processes, their work, how they found their way into this particular craft form, and their ideas about the future of Irish woodturning and indeed craft in general. First, we were going to have a chat with Stephen O'Connell, who is the curator of this exhibition. And Stephen has many years of experience working in the field of decorative and applied arts. He was a decorative arts specialist at Christie's Auctioneers in London, and he spent a number of years furnishing historic properties for the Landmark Trust throughout the UK. Informed by a broad historical perspective, Stephen has developed a keen understanding of and appreciation for Irish and international contemporary craft across a range of disciplines, and I managed to catch up with Stephen while he was here for the installation of After the Fall. Stephen, you're really welcome to the South Tipperary Arts Centre. It's really good to have you here. The exhibition currently underway is called After the Fall, and you're the curator of that exhibition.
That's right.
So it's a really fantastic array of contemporary woodturning. All the people involved in it have such diverse sort of backgrounds. And how did the concept for this exhibition come about, and how did you become involved?
Yeah, well, you're right. Everyone does have really diverse backgrounds, and that will probably be borne out by people when they get to see it. You know, that the works on display are really diverse. There's a lot of different diverse styles, methods, processes, timbers, finishes, colours, all that sort of thing. Really interesting. So Helena invited me to put something together for the Arts Centre last year, and we came up with this idea. She was looking for something in the sort of contemporary craft field, so to speak. And I suppose from my point of view, I'd done a couple of exhibitions previously, and a starting point for me is, what would I like to see? Which is obviously quite biased, but it's not necessarily a bad place to start. My background is in furniture, so I'm quite comfortable with the material.
Furniture design or?
Antique furniture specifically, actually, valuing and selling. So that kind of puts me at ease with timber as a material more so than, for example, glass or textiles or something like that. And you don't get to see very many dedicated woodturning exhibitions, certainly, or material-specific exhibitions as much as perhaps you should, in order for audiences to get a better view and a better understanding and appreciation for what's out there. You see lots of general craft exhibitions where there's some ceramics, there's some glass, there's some textiles, there's some furniture, there's some wood turning, and lots of other things. So you often see wood turning as a component of broader exhibitions or as a component of a general woodworking exhibition. I haven't had the privilege, because there has been quite a over the last 15, 20 years, there have been some key or seminal wood turning exhibitions for specific individuals, one or two of whom's work is in this show, specifically Emmett Kane and Liam Flynn.
You were talking about how there have been a couple of large exhibitions featuring a couple of the people in this show, but I think, what are you trying to say, that it's been
a while, basically, since there's been an overview of what's going on in contemporary Irish wood turning, where there's been a group exhibition, highlighting the work of those people who are really excelling and pushing the boundaries of the form, and just thought it was an opportune moment to take a look at that. When there's currently enough diversity and people at play in the area.
Do you know what? That it really is diverse, like you said. And what surprised me is, I think, just when you think of wood turning, you think of a vessel or a bowl, or, the things that you normally see.
Or a doorknob or a stair rail or something.
Exactly, those type of things. But the array of stuff that's on display here, and the finesse and the finishes of these things they're just exquisite, really gorgeous.
A lot of what's down there, 90% of what's there, is rooted in the vessel form. I mean, the lathe is the starting point for all of these things. So they all originate there. Yeah. And that's where the artistry comes in then, in terms of where you take it. I think lots of people who like the functional aspect of wood turning, if they're not particularly aware of the artistic pursuit of the practice that's out there, will be interested to see what's here. But I think there's a mutual appreciation, because everybody comes from the same starting point.
Well, I suppose they're placed in this sort of elevated, special place. But they are functional objects and could be used in very functional ways. But I think anybody who will walk into the room, their initial idea would be like, I want to touch that, or I want to...
Please don't touch.
I know, and that's the thing. We're all a little bit terrified here, because because the textures and the finishes, like
wood by its very nature is a very tactile material. People are drawn to it. People have an affinity for it. It's a very natural material. So it's completely understandable. It's a perfectly logical thing to be drawn to it, to want to touch it.
Really, really sculptural stuff as well, like those folded pots, I suppose you call them.
That's Alan Meredith's work you're probably talking about. Alan starts with his work on the lathe, and then there is a process thereafter of, I think, a certain amount of steam bending, but while the timber is still wet, clamping and tying to push it to shapes and forms that it would never get to naturally. And putting in folds that people have referred to as being almost paper-like. It's sort of like origami with timber. That's almost a centimetre thick. So it's quite a challenge. And it's really interesting to see the way some of his work from more recent years started off with small folds, and now what you're seeing downstairs is some really extreme shapes.
Pushing that sort of technique a bit further in time.
So it's really exciting. And
in reading all the bios of the various artists, and there's 8, so the one thing that I found, like, apart from the diversity of their backgrounds, was some of them would really be from a very fine art background, while others of them would be on the total other end of the scale.
Yeah, that's very true. And someone like Liam O'Neill...
Was it deliberate on your part to sort of choose people, from a really broad spread of backgrounds, or is that
I think it's probably a happy accident, and you're right, it probably is just the landscape of it generally. For me, it's looking at work of a particular caliber, and then looking at works that will work together. So someone like Liam O'Neill, who has some really miniature works in this exhibition. Liam started out as a woodturner's apprentice in the 1960s with no artistic inclination whatsoever. He might correct me on that, but it certainly wasn't the motivating factor in the beginning. It was a functional thing. It was learning how to, turn functional objects for everyday use, and that's still a large part of his practice. He still makes salad bowls and all of that sort of stuff that are sold all over the world. and is very successful at that. But alongside that, he has, and that's true for a lot of the people in this show. You know, there's more than one aspect to what they do.
There's bread and butter work, and then there's
the
free
artistic
work.
output.
Yeah.
Not true for everyone, but certainly for some of them.
Yeah.
But Liam then went on in the 90s to focus, or to turn his attention initially to large outdoor sculptural work. Ironically, what's on view here is really miniature stuff and is not what Liam would be most widely recognised for nowadays, which is large, sometimes public sculpture, but outdoor garden sculpture, kind of monumental vessels, seats, thrones, really big work. We just didn't have the capacity within this space to accommodate it, unfortunately. And I suppose it's probably a good point for me to say, the level of skill that these guys have, it's almost hardly for me to comment on. I have a little bit of experience of practical wood turning. I know what it involves. I've tried my hand at it. So from that point of view, I can kind of understand the level of acuity and skill. Yeah. So that's interesting. And what people are doing now is pushing the boundaries, that lays the groundwork for the next generation, so someone will find a new way of doing something, and a new interpretation, a new form, a new shape, a new texture, a new colour, a new style. Yeah. Can't wait to see what that is.
It'll be very interesting. It's just
worth probably mentioning something on an Irish/international level. So just that idea of the evolution of artistic practice. So Liam Flynn, whose work is in this show, and he will be widely known in the Irish craft world, who regrettably died a few years ago at an early age. But Liam's success was international. And his influence quite profound, and there are very few people who could be credited with sort of singular inventions, and Liam was one of those people. A couple of his pieces in this show feature his signature inner rim, this idea of a form within the form itself, ideas of volume, internal shape, really interesting ideas.
That's really thinking like a sculptor, isn't it?
Oh, completely. Yeah. I think that there's a certain amount of trial and error, and while people are hugely experienced with what they're doing, it's not the only force at play. There is that natural force. There is the material you're working with, which has its own energies, properties, and movement. So the initial cutting process in terms of cutting out your initial shape, and the drying processes. If you dry and season your work before you turn it, a lot of people don't. There's a lot of work here which is wet turned, or green turned rather. So it's turned effectively wet before the timber has dried out. Yeah. So after it's turned, the shape shifts and changes and becomes, and it gives a really lovely kind of
I suppose that's part of the kind of uniqueness of each piece then, and that as well, because each one's going to react differently.
And it's a marriage of the maker and the material.
What would be your, I suppose, takeaway from this, or what do you hope people will take from this? Or
from an audience point of view, I suppose I'd like to see people having their eyes opened a little bit more to what's out there. One of the motivating factors for me in doing exhibitions like this is I just think the quality and calibre of work that's being produced in Ireland is really, really high, and isn't always, though a lot of the people here are widely known and successful and celebrated and recognised for it. But I hope that, presenting a show like this in Clonmel in the Arts Centre will open it up, the form, wood turning specifically, the idea of contemporary craft generally to the arts audience that you have here. Hopefully it'll be a new and exciting thing for some people, inspirational for others, and who knows, I'm sure everyone will have something to say about it when they see it.
I think you're right, actually, because I think anybody who would walk in the door will find something to attract them to it, whether they're an artist or have very much an art background themselves, whether they're coming from the craft background or whether they're coming from neither.
Well, it's like you said in the very beginning, you want to touch the things. And as human beings, we have an innate relationship to the material, or the material world, and timber being part of that. So yeah, we're kind of naturally drawn to it. There's an affinity with the material, that everyone will feel on a basic kind of level.
Yeah.
So there's a starting point for everyone.
If people did want to get involved, Stephen, is there any particular one place that they can go to? Like, is there a website where they can go to say, look, I want to learn this? Can somebody
look at the Irish Woodturners Guild? I'm sure Google will bring up their website, and then there's regional chapters, so Midlands chapters. I'm not sure. Clonmel probably. I know there's a good kind of number of people at play in Tipperary and Waterford and stuff. So there is a lot of there, and then you can certainly do kind of some of the colleges of further education will have sort of evening courses, part-time courses and stuff like that. There's definitely it's not an inaccessible form.
Yeah, so there's people out there who can teach you if you want to learn. Yeah. Okay, listen, I'm going to leave it there, and thanks a million for talking to me.
Thank you.
And best of luck with the show. And my thanks to Stephen for making time to have a chat with me. It was a very busy couple of days that he had down here. Now we're going to hear from some of the artists who are involved in the exhibition. And like I said earlier, it's lovely to hear the artist's voice and to hear them describe so beautifully their process, and indeed you can hear the passion in their voices for what they do, and it's really quite inspiring. And first up, we're going to hear from Matt Jones. Matt Jones is originally from Wales and is now based in County Sligo, where the dramatic landscape is a major influence for his work. A graduate of the Chelsea College of Art in London, Matt took up woodturning as a hobby to meet the growing need for a new challenge, and it has since become his professional focus. His practice is deeply informed by the ethos that a maker should express in his work how he thinks and feels about the world and society.
I became interested in wood turning after I got a book about wood turning from a local library, and that was the beginning of my interest in it. After that, I found an evening class in a local college that was run by City and Guilds, and so I did that for a year. That was before moving to Ireland, so that was around 2004. What inspires me is the material. What I'm aiming to do when I make vessels is reveal the latent forces within the tree, and so by turning the wood wet and very thin, those forces sort of reveal themselves in the finished vessel. In addition to that, obviously looking at other wood turners that are sort of chasing a similar outcome is inspiring. Other crafts like pottery can be inspiring, but mostly for me it's the material. It's finding a tree or a log that is filled with flaws, knots, side branches, because I know that type of timber, that type of wood is going to make the most interesting object. Switching between production and more sculptural creative work, it's not easy at all. It requires not only a different mindset, but a practical change in the way you approach the work, the way you set up your workshop. I find that I more or less have to suspend production for the time that I'm being creative, which means quite often means that there's no money coming in. But it's really the only way to do it. I've tried to do both at once, and you just sort of unravel a bit. I think it's very important to preserve traditional skills like wood turning, ceramics, blacksmithing, etc. Hand making an object from the raw material to the finished object. It's so unlike modern manufacturing, and it's a direct link with a pre-industrial way of making and a pre-industrial way of living, that I think there'll always be a place for it. And I don't teach very much or demonstrate, mainly because I don't have time. again, if you're going to teach or bring people into your studio to teach them, that gets in the way of your production work, or it interrupts your flow as a maker. My interest, my passion is in making objects, not in the teaching of the craft. But I have friends that do that, and I always pass people on to them because they do it properly and they're set up for it. Their workshops are safe environments. My workshop it sort of suits me the way that I have it, but the idea of bringing in an unsuspecting member of the public fills me with dread most of the time. At the same time, I don't jealously guard knowledge that I have. I'm happy to help people and pass on some of my techniques, but it's not something I actively am engaged in at the moment. Maybe I will in the future. The question of whether high craft belongs in an art gallery is a question I think that's been settled really a long time now. When you consider Grayson Perry won the Turner Prize, that's got to be nearly 20 years ago. For the sort of major art institutions, I think the place of high craft within that context is more or less generally accepted. I guess smaller galleries around the country perhaps still cling to a more traditional division of craft and art. And so, yeah, it's great to see craft objects being displayed in art galleries, and I guess we can look forward to a time where that's not unusual.
Roger Bennett is well known in the Irish crafts world for his very distinctive coloured bowls and vessels. These are surprisingly thin, gracefully shaped, and many of them are dramatically inlaid with hundreds of silver dots arranged in constellation-like clusters or formal geometric patterns. A member of the Board of Visual Arts Ireland from 2005 to 2014, Roger's work has been exhibited internationally and is in numerous private and public collections. Roger also writes regularly on a diverse range of art and craft subjects.
Well, in my case, I guess I became a woodturner very much by accident. In 1992, I was on what was supposed to be a one-year career break from my previous career as a teacher of English and French. And I saw, quite early on in my career break, I saw that there was a wood event on in the sports hall in UCD over a weekend. I thought, oh gosh, that looks very interesting. I went along, and at this event, there was everything from growing trees to building boats to making furniture and wood turning. There were 4 or 5 wood turners demonstrating. They had brought their lathes into the hall, and they were making bowls and vessels and so on. And I had never seen a lathe before. I was absolutely mesmerized. I was like a child in a sweet shop, watching them and watching the shavings flying and watching shapes appear as if by magic from lumps of wood. And I watched and I watched and I watched, and I talked to a couple of the demonstrators, and I came home and I thought, well, while I'm on this career break, I must have a go at this. So I went to night classes and became even more smitten. And I put up a workshop behind the house, bought a small lathe and basic equipment, and I started making. And later that year, I started selling for the first time in the Blackrock market over weekends, coming up to Christmas. To cut a long story short, the school I was teaching in were very generous to me, very kind to me, and they allowed me to extend my career break year by year, ultimately to 4 years. And one of those years, 1994 to 1995, I spent in Kilkenny on a course run by the Crafts Council, a craft and design business development course. Emmett Kane actually did the same course the following year, and it was a tremendous year for me, where I had my own workspace. I had a mentor, the late furniture maker Clive Nunn, who was very generous with advice and help. I think that year really confirmed for me that this is what I wanted to do. And the result was that I didn't go back to teaching and became a full-time woodturner. When I started off, obviously the first people who influenced me were members of the Irish Woodturners Guild, other woodturners in the Dublin chapter of the Irish Woodturners Guild. I went along to their meetings and learned a lot from them. I became aware of woodturners, Irish woodturners, who were full-time professional woodturners, indeed 2 of whom are in this exhibition. Liam O'Neill I would describe him as probably the father of contemporary Irish woodturning. And I remember it almost felt like a pilgrimage when I was very new to woodturning. I went to his gallery in Spiddal in County Galway, and I must have spent 2 or 3 hours just looking, picking up pieces and literally stroking them with my fingers and trying to absorb as much as I could from him about shape and finish and so on. I remember buying a small spalted beach bowl, which I still prize. Liam Flynn, I was told about him by somebody else. Liam was still only in his 20s, still a very young man, but he had already made a big impact, not just in wood turning, but in the Irish craft sector in general. In those days, it was much harder to get information. Today we have the internet. Somebody mentions Liam Flynn, and within 5 minutes you found him on the internet, and you can look at dozens, if not hundreds, of photographs. We didn't have that access in the early 90s. So it was probably certainly several months, if not a year, before I actually got to see his work and eventually got to meet him. And it was a big thrill for me when he actually was very complimentary about what I was doing at the time. Gradually, I got to know the work of international turners through magazines, through books. I found a history of American wood turning, which was absolutely fascinating. So I got to see the work of a lot of the top American wood turners who were pioneers really in the whole wood turning movement in the second half of the 20th century. Most of my pieces are coloured, and very, very many of them are also inlaid. So what I do with my bowls and my vessels, I turn them, and generally they're turned quite thin, they're quite light if you pick them up. And after I've turned them, I mark out a pattern where I'm going to inlay with silver. The pattern which is marked out, very often I draw it on computer using a graphics package called Corel Draw. I mark the position of each dot very, very carefully, and then using a jeweler's drill, I drill a tiny hole which is into the wood but not through it, and I then glue in a very short length of silver wire. When all the holes have been filled with wire, I snip off the protruding bits and sand the silver flush with the wood. I colour the wood then using water-based wood dye, which I like using because it's not obliterating the woodiness of the wood. It works with and often enhances the figuring and the grain patterns in the wood. It draws them out. And then the piece is finished with Danish oil, which is a wipe-on, wipe-off oil, which dries, and with 3 coats I build up a subtle protective coating, which also gives it a nice gentle sheen. The wood that I mostly use is sycamore, but I also use woods like hornbeam and cherry. I use the same techniques for my wall pieces. There's one of them in the exhibition. And some years ago, I also started making jewelry using the same techniques. Make pendants and earrings and cufflinks and so on. Coloured wood with silver inlay. So the type of work I do, my way of working is it's very slow, it's very painstaking. If I make a mistake, if I drill through the side of the wall of a bowl, or if I put one piece of silver in the wrong place, if it's a very formal, regular pattern, the piece is ruined and it can't be saved. So very often I have, well, not very often, fortunately, but occasionally I have very expensive firewood. So when I'm working, when I'm inlaying, I wear a jeweler's magnifier and I work extremely carefully. Wood turning, fortunately, is extremely popular. I don't know what the numbers are now, but there must be between 800 and 1,000 members of the Irish Woodturners Guild. But many of so-called hobbyists are producing fabulous work. The Irish Woodturners Guild is the most extraordinary organisation, very, very active throughout the country. And it's just a wonderful forum for woodturners to learn from each other, to share. They run competitions, demonstrations, exhibitions. Absolutely an amazing organisation, which I couldn't believe it when I first encountered it. And members of the guild, almost without exception, I think are extremely generous with time and advice and information. Occasionally I demonstrate. I don't have enough space in my own workshop to teach or I have enough room for myself, and that's about it. But I love talking about woodturning to other woodturners and to wannabe woodturners, and sharing my knowledge with them and whatever I know, and learning so much from other woodturners.
And my thanks to Roger Bennett. We'll hear a little bit more from Roger at the very end of this episode. And the next featured artist is Gintaras Malinauskas. He's originally from Lithuania and he now lives in County Laois. He's a woodworker from an early age and joined the Midlands chapter of the Irish Woodturners Guild in 2014. He's since developed his craft to focus on meticulously detailed and colourful vases and vessels. He's been a winner in the professional competition category at the IWG seminar on more than one occasion, and has also been a winner in the established maker category at the RDS Craft Awards.
First time I saw woodturning when I was 11 in school, and that's left big impression on me. Usually I am turning unseasoned wood. After drying process I am carving with hand, power and pyrography tools. For finish I would use acrylic paints. My ideas come from nature. Enough ideas I get when I am working. Sometimes wood itself tells me how to finish. One of the biggest rewards in life was joining the Irish Woodturners Guild. Members of the Irish Woodturners Guild has helped me to become who I am today as an artist. Woodturning is a beautiful skill to have, and I think it is very important to conserve traditional skills. I am always happy to share my knowledge.
Liam O'Neill has already been described as the godfather of Irish woodturning, which, having spoken to the man himself lately, I think he might get a little bit of a kick out of. He's internationally renowned as a figure in the world of woodturning, and his vast experience and his own influence has been widespread within the woodturning world. An apprenticeship with John Shiel in Bagnallstown, County Carlow, saw him begin to develop his skills, and later he came into contact with the methods taught by Maria van Kesteren at the Kilkenny Design Workshops. This gave him the skills to transition to artistic turning. Liam is the founding member of the Irish Woodturners Guild and has worked closely with leading figures in the USA such as David Ellsworth.
I became a woodturner purely by accident. I got a job in Bagnallstown, County Carlow, with a man who was starting a wood business. I thought I'd be making tables and chairs, but when I walked in the first day, I discovered that they were working on these wonderful machines called wood-turning lathes, which I had never seen in my life. And I watched a guy turn a lamp and watched the lamp appear out of a block of wood under his chisel, and I was instantly hooked. And I found that I had found my life's ambition right there. I had found my calling. I never wanted to do anything else again. So I call myself the accidental woodturner. In 1983, I won the RDS Crafts Competition woodturning section and the Dr. Muriel Gahan Development Grant or Scholarship. And the money was used to travel in the US. And I visited all the top woodturners over there who were world leaders in the craft at the time. But while I was there, the American woodturners asked me to demonstrate once or twice, and they liked it so much that I ended up being invited to go back and teach. So I ended up teaching right around the world, and I have enjoyed that very much. I learned a lot from other turners. They learned a lot from me. It became a kind of an international exchange of ideas. I'm inspired by many things. I'm inspired by other craft workers, pottery in particular, I suppose. I'm inspired by nature and the shapes in nature. Inspiration comes in many forms and from many different places. I think it's just something that you can't really explain it sometimes. You could see the shape of a fork of a tree or something and it would give you a shape. But I would say mostly from looking at shapes from other woodturners. Woodturning in this country is highly regarded. I think that the Irish generally are fond of crafts. There's an acceptance. There's something in the Celt part of us that appreciates art and craft. And craftspeople and artists in the past were treated with high regard, and I think it's still the same. So wood turning benefits from that. So I would say that in comparison to a lot of countries, Ireland is well up on the scale of a population that is interested in crafts. In 1982, I organised Ireland's first wood turning seminar, the first ever. And then the following spring, I founded the Irish Woodturners Guild, and the Irish Woodturners Guild has been disseminating information by bringing in turners from abroad to demonstrate at events, and also developing Irish woodturners who grew up to be good demonstrators themselves. So there's been an awful lot of benefit from the Irish Woodturners Guild.
And my thanks to Liam for his contribution there. Also, big thanks to Matt Jones, to Gintaras, to Stephen O'Connell, the curator of After the Fall, and to Roger Bennett, who we're going to close out this episode with now, with a beautiful piece that he wrote and shared with me. So it's really lovely. I hope you enjoy it, and we'll talk to you all again next time.
If you don't mind, I'd love to end this with just a piece that I wrote a few years ago, in which I was trying to capture what wood turning means to me and what the whole experience is like and what my aspirations are. So it's a piece which goes like this. I love wood, the uniqueness of each piece, the history of the tree's life preserved in the ring patterns and figuring. I delight in the daily interaction between maker and material, the magic of shaping, turning argument into conversation. I dream of making a bowl as strong as an eggshell, as heavy as a whisper. Of capturing and fixing my favourite colours, drake mallard green, oil on water, midnight in midsummer, frosty night skies. And, with silver, I can indulge my love of order, imposing my markings on the wood's surface, complementing the natural flows and eddies of the grain with my precise patterns of dots. A completed bowl should satisfy all our senses. Line and form above all else, traced by eye and hand, from rim to base and all around. The smell of wood and oil, and whenever a bowl is right, it sings.